Hello, this is Michael Rees. Welcome to Ad Hoc, a virtual talk series. I'm a sculptor and new media naut. I'm here to have fun and sharp conversations with some of the smartest people in art, technology, and sculpture. My interests and those of our guests will range far and wide and focus on making and the artist's role in our current era. We'll be talking to artists, curators, designers, and more. Welcome to Ad Hoc. Ed, you were the curator of the Parasite part of the exhibition, and Tom, of course, is the curator of the Site part of the exhibition. And it's kind of an incredible story about how all that came about, and Ed, how you got involved in the project. And I wonder if you'd chat about that a little bit.
I think our first conversation happened at Moving Image Art Fair. So,
yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And I mean, it was happening at the exact same time that we were educating ourselves on AR and VR and understanding how significant this was becoming as a fine art medium. And I think, you, Michael, have been way out ahead in terms of already combining the immersive media with the physical. I don't know very many other people have caught up to you or even thinking along the same lines that you are. So my brain was already kind of like full of all these wonderful ideas. And then here comes this guy who's not only got this down, but he's like ahead, a step ahead of everybody else. So it was a very intriguing invitation to listen to what you guys were planning for your solo show. And, in terms of our ability to take this invitation and go out and talk to other artists and get them excited and see how all that developed, it was a delight. So I can't thank both you and Tom again.
Well, but also one of the ways that you got involved is because of Will Pappenheimer, right? And
Will was one of the artists that we had included. Well, you as well. I can't. I think I learned of Will first because a friend of ours had commissioned an AR piece by him that works. It's a geolocated piece. It only works in Central Park. And so she commissioned it for her, I guess now ex-boyfriend, so that when he would walk the dog, he could look at his phone and he would sort of enter this immersive environment and he's walking through. And so she had told me, you got to meet this guy. And we did. And yeah, you're right. It was Will who connected us.
Yeah, which was really pretty wonderful. And very, because, Will is probably, they started Manifest AR. Will was one of the people that began Manifest AR. I think that's in 2011 or maybe 2013. Can't remember the exact date of Manifest. But, he's identified AR as an important platform for artists, really from the inception, from the start. And Manifest AR was, of course, extremely important in the development. There are many people, Chris Manzione and Mark, I'm forgetting his last name. Is it Klink? No, not Mark Klink. That's a different artist. Well, anyway, sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the members of Manifest AR. But nonetheless, and then at the same time, Ed, that year that we met and talked and you did Moving Image, that was one of the first years that you brought AR and VR into Moving Image. Isn't that right?
It definitely was. And we were trying to make a big splash. As art for organizers, we were really interested in sparking collectors' interest in these art forms. And that's kind of hard to do if one, they've never heard of it, and two, they see one example of it. Yeah. So we brought in a large number. Thinking of Manifest AR, 4 of the artists who are responding to your show in Site Parasite were founding members of Manifest AR. So
yeah, that's right. Right, that's interesting. Yeah, for sure. And then, the thing is I give real kudos. I think it's worth talking about on some level. And that is the difficulty of engaging. For example, Grounds for Sculpture took a chance to build a platform for AR in an exhibition, which is a very difficult thing to do. And Ed, if I remember that many of our early conversations was working out how people were going to access the AR and what we should actually do, whether we should build a standalone app or it. So, I think it's interesting to note that just how difficult that is, what a complicated level, and how that museums and art spaces experience with that is very low. They don't have a lot of, and at the same time, Tom, you guys taking on such a treacherous and dangerous, possibility, right?
Well, why not? I mean, that's what it's all about, really. Can't play it safe all the time.
That's right. That's exactly right. But I think AR has some really, for example, I developed a lot of projects in a program called Mateo, and then one day Apple bought Mateo, and then Mateo was wiped out. And so, I'm sure there were other companies that had millions of dollars into that. I don't care about them. I care about the fact that I developed a whole body of artwork in Mateo that is now gone. And I either have to recapitulate it in a different software. And I think this is one of the great advantages on one level and problems on the other level of augmented reality and new technologies in general. As an artist, if I were to do a public art project, for example, that means that I'm committing, just like any software developer, to annual or semi-annual recapitulations of the software.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed, I know you've dealt with this quite a bit. How do you talk to collectors, or how do you talk to curators or museum people about this fledgling media?
Well, unlike most other media, more and more we're first talking to the lawyers. And there's a very interesting sort of subcategory of art law that's developing around these very questions that you're asking. Yeah. So, you don't need an SLA when you buy a painting, but perhaps you do when you buy a immersive media piece.
Yeah.
And along the same lines, questions of obsolescence aren't new to any sort of moving image artwork. Mm-hmm. And museums have invested quite a lot of money in conservation and developing connections with other museums around the world so that they're kind of staying up to date on the latest technologies and the latest thoughts there. But the example of Apple deciding to discontinue something or buying something and discontinuing it is particularly alarming and problematic with AR and VR in particular, because they're so new. Yeah. And it probably won't be until there's a very large sort of consumer base, or a lot of people buying and using that technology before somebody will commit to upgrading it on a continuous basis and not leaving people hanging who'd spent all that time developing something in it. Yeah, that is frustrating. But I'm curious, just to turn the question back around, since that time, have you taken any steps to kind of export your work into different formats, or what are your options in terms of trying to prevent that from happening?
Well, on one level, for example, publishing the book, we talked extensively about making the AR available to anybody that bought the book. So any Target or whatever. Now, technically it is available if you have the software, which we didn't really publish widely. I didn't make a link that people could download. We chose to have the software on the tablets in the space, not to ask people to download it and go through it. Now, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I wish you'd had the software to download it." But the point is that we created a unified or a standard experience that everybody that came into the exhibition could have. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't messy it up or muddy it up with little almost tributaries, like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do it. We just had that experience in that environment. And so we talked a lot about hosting it on a server and allowing it to be downloaded. And then in the long run, the issue is anybody, there were 6 artists in the show and myself, all of whom created custom applications for the exhibition. Are they really going to update them regularly? Okay, maybe the first year, second year, third year, they might have that desire. But at some point, there's no money involved in the update.
Right.
They're not selling to new customers or new clients. It's going to die, right? And so we decided not to do it, not to marry it to the book. And I think that that's not a bad choice, because the other thing is that just like a live event, you might hear a recording of the event, but you don't feel the vibe. You're not in the space. You're not, all these different kinds of things.
Right.
And so you have to acknowledge that there was something unique about that time and that place that will never be repeated, that can only be imagined. And so I have decided that I'm okay with that I don't have a problem with that. I've decided that, and I think, the works still continue. I still have my ARs on the works. And if I showed them again, I would show them with the tablets, et cetera. And I would keep that going as best I could. But I couldn't guarantee it for 100 years, that's for sure. And so there's something lovely. I guess I'd say that it's something performative. We've talked about this in other conversations about the performative versus the more like an object-oriented event.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of the performative is very much at play. It's something that happened in this place and this time, not to be repeated again in a way. So, it's a choice. It's that simple. It's a choice. I think as an artist, especially a sculptor, sculptors like to make things out of marble and bronze, stuff that lasts, quote unquote, forever. But we also have other examples, people like Krista, for example, and then also the sculptor that I studied with, Dale Eldred, in the Kansas City Art Institute. He never, he made these temporary exhibitions, and he said, how long does a work of art need to last? And it's not forever necessarily. So, but I do think the computer industry has a problem on its hands. People have to pay enormous amounts of money to keep their data intact. And if you're a huge corporation, it's sort of not a big deal. It's just part of your bottom line. But if you're individuals like artists and, even just regular people trying to keep your files in order.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. We're librarians now. We're archivists. We're, our responsibilities have extended exponentially, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say exponentially.
In the short term, Michael, it might be worthwhile to consider filming the installation.
Yeah.
And the interaction, even if it's just you interacting, triggering the augments, so that the experience is documented in that way, in addition to what we did with the book. But I would like to say something else too, is that one of the reasons why I was so excited about working with you on this project was that, for looking back historically in the last, back to the 50s in particular, people, most notably Robert Rauschenberg, at least to my mind, erasing a de Kooning drawing. Talk about not seeing something again, but the act of doing that and then creating Monogram, which is that incredible painting that sits on the floor with the goat and the tire, redefining what painting is in the midst of a very eclectic, colorful pop art scene. Yeah. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, with the art and technology movement, making that big rectangular sculpture that was filled with mud, and it was the air. It was activated by air coming up from the bottom, so that the bubbles would come up through the mud. And this kind of thinking in terms of painting, sculpture, fine art objects, experience, longevity, physicality, non-physicality was one of the reasons why I was so excited about you and this project, because even though, there's no evidence that you're a rigid follower of Rauschenberg, you're certainly aware of him, but just through the threads of art history, part of how I see it was, wow, this is like, if I thought if he lived longer, he might get into this type of art, much more augmented reality. But you came along, and so there's it's sort of like that harmonic kind of passing of the torch in a large way in terms of what's in the ether. And that's what I see in this. It's a redefinition of the object. My focus has always been to challenge what sculpture is, but this is even much more than that.
Well, kind of brings me to, Ed, your essay in the book, and which is entitled, Augmented Reality, the Street Art of the 21st Century. The notion of street art already implies all kinds of temporality, some notion of temporality. And I wonder if you have a, kind of an angle on that.
Well, there's two notions to that title. One is exactly that. The other is street art. Nobody gives you permission to do street art.
Yeah.
And so
great point.
One of the things that's really exhilarating about AR and the piece I was talking about earlier in Central Park, nobody gives you permission to put that piece in Central Park, but nobody can stop you either.
Yeah.
And so there's this additional freedom for artists working in this technology that has never, I think I mentioned in the essay itself, you could place an AR piece right next to the Mona Lisa in the Louvre and nobody could stop you from doing that.
That's right.
And how amazing is that? And that opens up sort of, other thoughts of where and how art in the public sphere can and should sort of exist. But I wanted to go back to something you both had kind of hinted at or said directly that really fascinates me about this technology in general. You said in determining things about the platform and whether or not it could be downloadable, you were making choices. This is why I'm so excited about AR and VR. At the moment, you guys are all making what I think are historical choices across the board in terms of the relationships that Tom was talking about between physical and performative, but also in terms of where the aesthetics of these platforms diverge between the commercial and the fine art, what the metaphors are that are important. I mean, I know you communicate with other artists, but some of these, decisions that will live on for a very long time in art schools around the world are being made in the studios today. And so there's a few things more exciting than that from my point of view in working with artists.
I think you bring up a really, really interesting point. And, for example, I've seen, first of all, of course, you see the influence of one AR artist on another AR artist. You see that happening regularly. You see the reverberations and the currents and somebody taking on a problem. I remember I put the ants on the clown and I thought Claudia had done that. And I called her up and I said, Claudia, did you do, and it turned out she did something with cockroaches, not with ants. So I felt comfortable enough to do the ants, not to do the cockroaches. But then simultaneously, what I've seen, Tomiko Thiel's work, which is the, I'm not great with names, so I apologize immediately, but it had something to do with the red tide and with the contamination of the oceans, right? Mm-hmm. And she's done that on several occasions in several ways, whatever. And now, of course, Apple, other people have done these AR shows. They're sort of promoting the technology they're promoting. They're brilliant. And they've gotten really good artists to do it and stuff. And I see them recapitulating the work of Manifest AR or many of these artists along the way, as if they didn't even know it. And now, I talked about how I developed the inflatables. I did research on all the inflatables that I could get my hands on. I went back to so I really seriously doubt that those artists didn't also do that research, and that they had another platform. So I think what your point is very interesting, but there's a compression of time. It's not happening over generations now. It's happening over years, like 1 or 2 or 4 years. But I think it's notable to know that a person has already pioneered that investigation, and then to see people recapitulating that pioneering, it's
Sure.
a fascinating problem.
Well, on that note itself, I've gone rounds and rounds. I've worked with a lot of artists who kind of on both sides of appropriation and every other aspect of intellectual property. And where I'm coming to is the idea that it doesn't really matter where you got an idea from, it matters what you do with it.
Yeah, that's right.
And, if you can take an idea, if you can erase a de Kooning in a better way, in a more sort of compelling way, then you should have credit for that.
Yeah.
So.
Or even if you can erase a de Kooning in this moment and have it mean something else, or use the syntax in another way. It's like we didn't invent language, and yet here we are using language in novel ways, for example.
If you erased a de Kooning today, you'd be like really sad, because that'd be a lot of money out the door. So.
Well, like a banana, like that shredder, the auction.
The Banksy, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, the Banksy shredder at the auction. I talk to my students about this a lot, because, they may start doing something that you're seeing in the galleries right now. And, because it's in the galleries, somehow it's got a bigger presence, it's more legitimate or something. And so that everything after that moment seems to be a copy of it or whatever. And and that's, the anxiety of influence, and also the originality mythology. And I encourage my students, it's like, well, that's a great opportunity to reach out to that artist and make a group show, because you're already interested in that as well. And so this is a territory you all share, as opposed to a place that one artist colonized, right?
But you also bring up the point that I think Freeman brings up in the essay, which is there are no more gatekeepers when you're talking about geolocated. I can put anything next to the Mona Lisa. I don't need a curator to approve it.
Yeah.
And so that is also an interesting direction this is heading, or has the potential to. What I'm worried about, and I'm curious because nobody's tried it yet, is the technology to stop geolocated AR from appearing next to the Mona Lisa. Could the museum somehow interfere with that through some application? I mean, maybe they don't care enough to invest in that,
But say, for example, on a subtext of what we're talking about is the notion that AR can inform a physical site, right, in a metaphysical way. In other words, it would bring values that are not necessarily inherent in that site. It would bring new values to it. So an example would be a Confederate monument, right? On one level, you could have somebody that did an AR that extolled the virtues of Robert E. Lee. And then on the other hand, you could have another person come in and do an AR that absolutely denigrated Robert E. Lee and denigrated the status and the values that he was fighting for, et cetera. And then you could have somebody that did a satire of Robert E. Lee. And then you could have and basically that entry point could have a myriad number of values. And that's what AR is so brilliant about. It turns the entire world into a channel, and it allows every individual, it turns the entire world into a portal or a door or a prompt to a channel, and allows every individual to express their opinion about that real world thing. Now, in many ways, that's what a website is, or that's what the web is, et cetera. But now it's crossed a barrier. It's in the world. It's connected to physical objects. I always thought it'd be wonderful to do a show where, you just opened up to all the augmented reality artists in the world and let them build their own show on top of your show, which, this show was in some sense a step towards. Of course, you've got control issues, right? you only want the best work, and all that stuff.
Well, actually, in London, we used to do a event during Moving Image called Bring Your Own Beamer. And we had very large space, and for one night only, if you could bring the means to project your piece, you could be in the fair.
Right.
And so you could do something along those lines as well, have a kind of bring your own viewer or whatever sort of event. I'm fascinated by that. I think.
Now, how did that work? Tell me about, your response to it and to the works and the quality of the works. And, in other words, we often go to things for curated experiences. They're the
Right.
best, or they're according, but now all of a sudden it's an uncurated, that's what we're talking about with John Craig Freeman and all that stuff. But now, so did you have as much, talk to me about how your experience as a viewer shifted in that moment.
Well, we very carefully framed it as an event, meaning it started at 6 o'clock and ended at 8 o'clock. And it was physically separated from the rest of the fair. So nobody was confused about which context they were in. And yet the chaos of it, the excitement, the energy level of it really kind of exhilarated people, so that after they leave there and they're walking through the rest of the fair, this idea that anything is possible and that this is a very youth-oriented medium kind of like stayed with them. And so we found it very successful, both as fair organizers, but also as just art viewers. I loved Bring Your Own Beamer. 2 or 3 times I would discover somebody who I wanted to learn more about and possibly even work with. So
yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah,
that's fantastic. The other thing that I kind of want to pick back up on is this idea that the early works or the early investigations of artists, how important they are, like that they reverberate into the art schools and into the classrooms and also into young artists' work as they start to build their careers. They become reference. And, there was this, it's a little bit, there's this guy named, I wonder if you guys know him. He wrote a book called or coined the term, I should say, morphogenetic resonance. His name is Rupert Sheldrake. And he made this observation that once a single rat solved a maze, however long that took, let's say it took 10 minutes, any subsequent rat anywhere in the world could solve the maze in faster time. And he did experiments about this. And so in other words, the point is that his idea that there were fields, there are electric, or, I don't know what kind of fields, electrochemical fields or something like that, that somehow or another, again, it's a little woo-woo. And it also has a little bit of an intent, this weird physics and entanglement about it. But the thing is that I think it's kind of fascinating. You come
Absolutely.
to technologies and you say anything is possible. And then all of a sudden a group of early practitioners develop a practice around it. And that practice ends up being adopted widely. And people, you see it done and redone on many different occasions. I mean, it's a phenomena anyway. Maybe I've taken this down a dark alley.
No, I think it's fascinating. It kind of applied to humans would explain why who you want to fix your VCR is the person who's the youngest person in the room increasingly. Yeah. So somehow this tech awareness technology is being passed down. And you're right. The younger person in the room is going to be able to pick it up and do it faster than anybody else in the room.
It's amazing, actually. There's a certain... there's just a certain level of involvement that makes it appropriate. Now, I also find that, I'm an old dog and I work with young dogs, and the young dogs make a lot of obvious mistakes too. So, the point is that it takes all of us to participate in reality,
Right.
and create it. So good. Talk to me a little bit, talk to me a little bit about how you went about choosing the artists in the show, and the fact that they weren't really chosen according to theme. Usually when that group show happens, there are themes.
Right.
We're doing still lives. That would be an obvious one, or even some conceptual theme. But it seems a little bit that there was like freedoms offered. In other words, possibilities, potentialities offered. How did you go about forming the show and forming, this Parasite part of the show?
I was rereading the essay a while ago, and one of the things that jumped out at me was how even the approach to being in an exhibition within an exhibition varied quite a bit among these artists. And I think that came out of the very conscious decision to encourage that came out of the conversation we had with you, that you saw this as an opportunity for these artists to do whatever it is they wanted to do. So we looked for diversity of practice. We looked for people who we thought would respond to that challenge in a very interesting way. And also a diversity of aesthetic. If everybody was working in a very sort of like ironic, glitchy way, I think you would have kind of been able to watch one or two and thought maybe, okay, I get it. But all 6 of these artists' aesthetics are very, very different. So you wanted to go from one to the next and again and kind of see everything. And so the diversity was a big component of it. And the idea that we knew these are artists. And it was funny, as I was reading their bios, they're all professors. They're all...
I noticed that too. I was thinking that too. Every single one of us is a professor.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I only realized that after the fact, and I thought I probably was a subconscious decision there as well.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, I think that speaks a lot to the way that art is created and consumed in the United States. I mean, avant-garde aside, right? Let's just put that aside for just a second. People experimenting with new forms are not readily embraced by the art world, right? This is not an easy, this isn't an easy road.
Right.
And so the fact of the matter is to get that kind of support, you really need a job. You need a university job in which there's a research component to what is going on. And kind of an investigative, speculative. And I would say that actually, I don't think it's a primary theme, but it's certainly a secondary or maybe a tertiary theme. This notion of investigating what could be or what might be, some speculative nature to the work,
right?
To all of the works in the show.
That's a really good point. I think everybody's central narrative of the work could be a really good basis for a sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
There's a lot of speculative fiction happening there.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think in a way that, Will Pappenheimer's piece with the woman sort of whispering in your ear and then contrasted to, I mean, by the way, despite the fact that there wasn't a massive coordination of themes or whatever, there were still tendencies that were picked up. And so I'm contrasting Will's piece of the woman whispering and sort of underwater, sort of in a drawing happening, et cetera, to Carla's piece of the inflatable comedian,
Exactly.
And something really kind of intriguing there. And then there were other figurative aspects in John Craig Freeman's work, which was really a piece about loss.
Yeah, that was one of the more soulful pieces in terms of kind of being able to relate to it out of no matter what medium you had chosen, that subject matter and the way he approached it was kind of resonate, I think, at least as soulfully as he approached it. But the other thing as well is the diversity of problem solving, meaning Chris Manzioni, for example, is trying to solve a very specific problem that all of these immersive technologies have, which is the human eye and a human ear can tell the difference. The technology is nowhere near good enough yet to fool the human senses.
Yeah.
And that gap itself becomes a very rich area to mine, which is what he's doing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. Chris is, I think his works, as you say, they deal a lot with sound and image. And, I think we talked a little bit with Eddie Shankin, one of the other authors in the book, and we talked a bit about this issue, about there's nothing about AR that makes you think it's real. Whereas, say, with a film or a photograph or whatever, there's always, there's a lot of confusion. Human beings look at that and they look at a portrait of something and they think of it as real. They don't think of it as a representation. They don't think of it as, they think, oh, that's so-and-so, period. I've seen that look on that person's face or whatever. Or, the famous fact that the film that's train is coming at you and everybody jumped out of the way thinking that it was real. We never have that experience with AR. We are 100% from the start aware that this is a mediated, constructed environment, and we are experiencing something that is, and I find that to be, again, it's wrong to say new or new, brand new, whatever, but I find it to emphasize something that is unique and unusual.
Well, there's a big physical component to that, which is of all the other examples you've given, it's the one experience where you're controlling the viewer.
Yeah, right.
You have to physically move it, where if I'm sitting in a movie theater, I just sit back.
Yeah.
So I think that keeps reminding you that this is artificial in a weird way.
Yeah, the interactivity, which I think is what, like if I were really I've thought about this a bit. I think the real innovation of computer technology in our lives is the notion of interactivity, right?
Yeah.
That you're constantly editing and re-editing. And whether expert or novice, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. You can enter into it in that creative way, on that creative level. And I think every one of the pieces has that quality to it. For certainly you either interact with it physically, or people often enter into the visual space and have their friends take photographs of them inside the augmented reality space, which I find so fascinating, right? That people think there's a picture there. That they love that they see it as a site very much like going to Mount Rushmore, very much like going to some other place where I was here. I want you to know that I was here.
Well, partly, Michael, your pieces sort of evoke joy and celebration, and people appreciate that.
Yeah.
The choices of, the shapes and the colors, and the fact that there's this new technology, which maybe isn't new to us, but it's new to so many people. And there's an access there that's really important. People sometimes feel that they don't fit in when they go to a museum or even a historical site. And part of what this does is that it introduces something really new to the experience, something that they're unfamiliar with. And at the same time, it's important that they're fun too. I think that's another aspect to it. I mean, it can certainly go the other way too, but for new work to trigger these interactions as I've witnessed, you've witnessed, and others, it's really a remarkable success in that way.
Tom, you of course are an artist. We've talked about that and how important it is being, you being a curator and also being an artist. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I'm kind of interested to ask you is certainly these, there are three-dimensional objects in the augmented realities. And I wonder, I mean, you have a very open mind and you're very flexible about the way you think about these things. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if somebody put to you, it's a little bit academic question, but nonetheless, if somebody put to you, are these sculptures? Are the interactivity that people are experiencing within the AR, do you consider them in the realm of sculpture, or has it moved past it? Multimedia is such an old-fashioned word. How do you think about it?
Well, I would go back to the beginning of the century, 20th century, not this current one. But there were quite a few artists in the who, I'm not talking about painters, but there were the Lisitskys of the world and people who were in the early part of the 20th century exploring all types of materials and different ways of visualizing beyond the picture plane. Part of that might have been influenced by Cubism, thinking about how dimensionality extends beyond the traditional picture plane. And then when you get into the 70s in particular with Robert Irwin and other artists, even like I mentioned, Rauschenberg and the art and technology movement, there were some painters doing work with that, but most of them were experimental, three-dimensional or multimedia artists, however you want to categorize them. But the basis of the work still remained rooted in the object for the most part. I mean, even you have an experiential experience with, a light experience rather, with Irwin, and how he used projected light and diffused materiality in really important ways that really influenced artists for decades later. I think your installation still is rooted in the object, but it's not far at all from what artists like El Lissitzky and others, Man Ray, other artists up to the contemporary times in the 2000s have been trying to do. You have been a leader in combining the AR technologies with the sculptural object, and I keep, one of the fascinations about this for me has been that you're still rooted in sculpture, but you're pushing the experiential and the the idea of illusion, experiential, a hands-on participation even with the sculptural object is very interesting. And you always one of the artists that you spoke about often was Sol LeWitt, and
Right.
this is extending his work in a historical way. The idea of the geometry and the inflatable and the interacting linear forms of these sculptures. If you stand there and really spend time with them, aside from the AR, they are remarkable in what they do in the space. So there's so many layers in your work, this current installation in particular, that cross through so many things in the continuum of sculpture and experimental art that this is really important work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So many things came across my mind while you were talking. I was like, ping. I do think that there's something about the physical and the performative for me that has always been extremely important. I did a lot of early performance and I did a lot of installation, which seemed to be, there was so much engaged with the body. We've talked about the body in these works and how they have the image of some aspect of the body, but also the human body is engaged on many different levels in many different ways. And I think there's something to me that really appeals about using this that has to do with that interrelationship between the object and performance. And that interactivity is a kind of performance. And so I really kind of, I don't want to say I trap the audience or manipulate the audience, but I sort of bring them into the fact that they actually also begin to perform in this environment, in this space. And that it's not just, they can't be a passive observer in this. They have to be activated. Their mind has to be activated in ways that, maybe the first time we thought of, the notion of sculpture or painting occurred to human beings, we had the same response. And maybe at the same time, there is something new afoot that people are in the art experience are, kind of perceptually engaging another level. We've accessed another level or another way to be. Now, I did want to talk about two other ideas that are sort of in the show. One, of course, is Parasite and the notion of the fact that something lives within something else, and the way these artists are living within, but also the idea of a portal. We mentioned it earlier. Let's talk about the portal thing first. Don't you think that, first of all, AR in general lends itself to the notion of a portal, that we can visit many different places from the same spot. And how does that, I guess I don't really have a good question about that. Do you guys, it's a topic, it's a subject. What do you guys think of that? How would you think about that? How would you engage it?
Well, as soon as you say a portal, first of all, I think that's the perfect metaphor for AR, but I come back to a piece that we showed by John Creek Freeman in Istanbul. So the art space was in a building, but he had geolocated his particular AR piece in the huge courtyard outside. And what he had done was you had all these Turkish people at coffee shops and stuff mulling about, looking on their phone at all these people in Beijing kind of going about their day. So you had this sort of like two different worlds colliding in this one space. And it looks like something out of, what is the Marvel character, Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
You know, where you could just do like this with your fingers and open this doorway into another part of the world. So, you know, again, it's pretty straightforward metaphor, but it does, you know, make the mind reel at the opportunities or possibilities there.
Yeah.
I think I think seriously, Michael, I think you need to write to Elon Musk and send him a copy of this book and tell him that you want to do an installation piece when he launches another satellite.
Wouldn't that be awesome? You know, instead of having a Tesla car, you know, start sending sculptures into space with augmented reality aspects. That'd be super cool. Well, listen, I mean, I feel like we've kind of covered some of the big themes. You know, it was so valuable to have both of you. I mean, I feel so honored that both of you had such an active role in this exhibition, and that you both brought your A games with you. You know, I really deeply appreciate that. You know,
You're most welcome, Mike. Well deserved the amount of thought you put into it.
No, it was an amazing opportunity and a really fun experience. I can't thank you guys, both of you, enough.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
dang. I can't wait till what he does next, Ed.
I know, exactly.
The incredible thing is that, like, from the very beginning, I was talking, I want to do a show, I want to have all these other artists in the show, and I want to have a book. And, you know, it seemed so simple at the time. And Tom never sort of said, well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Tom was always game. And I think that's one of the reasons that it happened, right? Because otherwise I could see many people saying, yeah, well, you know, we're having a show with you, you know.
It was a great ride. It really was.
It was a bold move, Tom. Kudos to you.
It really was. It really was. Unbelievable.